Hi, everybody, and thank you so much for joining us for the next episode of our e-commerce Espresso. If it's your first time joining us, then welcome. These short sessions are just designed to give you as much e-commerce knowledge as we can fit into your coffee break. As we try and keep these sessions quite short, unfortunately, we don't have time for a live Q&A, but if you do have any questions that you'd like to put to us or our guest speakers, then please do tweet them over to @LoyaltyLion HQ using the hashtag e-commerce Espresso, and we'll get back to you as soon as we can. Today, I'm really pleased to announce that we have Josh Duggan with us. He is the co-founder at Vervaunt. Josh, do you want to tell us a little bit about yourselves and what you do over at Vervaunt?
Yeah, thank you. And thanks for having me. So hi, everyone. So my name's Josh. So I've got about 8 years paid media experience. So I used to manage Google's search account for about 2 years, moved to a Group M agency, worked on a host of brands such as Nintendo, Butlins, Aston Martin, Wilkinson Sword, and a range of others. And then about 2 years ago, co-founded Vervaunt. So we're an e-commerce consultancy and paid media agency. So we've got 2 people working on the e-com side. They mostly do platform selection, consultancy, like UX work as well. They work with like PlayStation, Doc Martens, and larger enterprise sized brands. And then on the paid side, we're a team of 6. And then we manage Muji, Lulu Guinness, Sarah Chapman, and a range of others. But yeah, that's a really quick summary to me and Vervaunt.
Fantastic, thank you. Great, so we'll jump straight into the questions, I think. Our first question for you today. E-commerce is one of the fastest changing industries in the world and one of the fastest growing as well. So what would you say at the moment the biggest paid media opportunities are for marketers?
Perfect. Yeah, so obviously e-com is a great place to be. It's growing globally and in the UK. International is becoming much easier with kind of multi-currency features and fulfillment. And then I'd say paid media is probably like one of the most cost-effective ways to drive new customer acquisition. So as I mentioned, I've got quite a bit of experience in paid. Fortunately, search and social are on track to account for 70% of the increase in ad spend this year. So search and social are still like growing channels. They're pretty prominent. Search is probably a more mature market and quite established, but there's still a lot of opportunity to kind of grow your business through there. And then social as well has just increased massively. So it's like 95% of the top US retailers promote on Instagram. 60% of new businesses which are kind of discovered online are found via Instagram. And just in general, we've seen a big shift of kind of clients investing in social. So I think with case studies from, like Gymshark, Simba Sleep, and kind of like a lot of other kind of like new businesses, social's been like a key channel to grow. So I guess in general, they've kind of been quite prominent for us. And then I'll go through like the main opportunities for those 2 channels. So I guess for search specifically, it will always be one of the most cost-effective channels to drive new customer acquisition. So you've actively got people searching for your brand, searching for your product, searching for your industry, or whatever it might be. And in general, the key growth and kind of like opportunities there are around kind of automation, AI, and kind of building out like a really sophisticated advertising like approach. So a few examples within search would be so you can basically use tools and APIs to be quite sophisticated with what you do. So on previous clients, we've adjusted the ad copy based on the weather. So you can essentially like link in third-party data sources to adjust what marketing message you show. We've got scripts which will scrape Google every hour, and if you've got competitors bidding on your brand, it will turn on and enable your branded campaigns. And then with the cost saving when they're paused, you can obviously put that in kind of other channels. So I'd say there's a lot of opportunity to kind of use like more sophisticated technology in search. Another big avenue, as I mentioned, is AI. So automated bidding is something which has become like, it's been around for like, since I've worked in the industry. So it's been around for like a good 8 to 10 years or so, but in general, it's becoming a bigger, like more and more prominent. So Google have recently released like bidding strategies within AdWords. So historically, you would have had to pay third-party bid providers to enable you to do this, such as like Kensho or Marin. But now you can test automated bidding strategies within the interface themselves. So that's a big kind of like opportunity for advertisers to make the most of, say, of like real-time bidding and like AI sophistication there. And then also, if you're smaller retailers, Google are basically making it easier for you to advertise. So they have now got an API between Magento and the Merchant Center to build your product feed. There's an API between Shopify and Merchant Center to build a shopping feed. And then once that's all set up, there's a Google shopping feature called Smart Shopping, where it essentially optimizes and manages everything for you. So I wouldn't really recommend this for bigger brands where, you know, you've got profit margin considerations and kind of like merchandising decisions to make. But if you're a small business, Smart Shopping's like not a bad way to go down. And then I'd say from a social perspective, the main opportunities are like just the constantly changing like ad formats that Facebook are releasing, and then also where consumers now are much more inclined to make purchases through social. So a good example here would be with Instagram story adverts. About a year and a half ago, we would only use that for branding. So it'd purely be to kind of like promote a video or promote a message. And then the metrics we would use would be kind of engagement. But now people are getting used to the format, getting used to swiping up and purchasing. We actually recommend that as a kind of a DR channel to drive sales. And it performs really well on an ROI basis as well, which is quite interesting. And then also, again, with social, there's like a lot more sophistication you can apply. So in comparison to, say, like 5 years ago, you can now be a lot more sophisticated with, say, for example, your sequential messaging. So if someone engages with one of your ad formats, you could then retarget them with another message. So if they've engaged with your advert and not been to the website, you might want to give them a bit more of an incentive, or you might want to pay more for that user if you know they've already engaged with your brand. So you can look at sequential messaging. There's a lot of other things you can do through socials. There's a lot of kind of like third-party tools which will help optimize your ad creative. So you can dynamically change different parameters. So you can change the images to see what engages most of your customers. And then I'd say just in general for social, the biggest opportunity is it's probably the best channel for reaching like a really specific audience. So in terms of like reaching a really niche audience with a really specific message, social is probably the best avenue. And the fact that it's now become a great avenue to drive revenue and ROI. Yeah, it's kind of like a key driver of marketing spend at the moment. Everyone's kind of like pushing budget there, where consumers are buying more and more via social. I'd say that's probably like a big opportunity.
God, that's a lot of exciting things. I want to kind of get back to my desk and start playing around. Definitely. I think it's amazing what you can automate with some of those tools as well. You know, just saving people a lot of time, but making them a lot more effective at the same time. I think
Definitely.
It's really interesting. So you talked at the beginning about how these are kind of really cost-effective ways to drive acquisition, but all of these things, search and social, they're actually, I imagine they're extremely good ways of reaching your existing customers as well. You know, whether it's product feeds or getting to those niche people, but actually a good way of kind of re-engaging the people who've bought from you before as well.
Definitely. Yeah, so obviously, like dynamic product ads or DPAs in social have become like pretty common. So most advertisers now, you know, will be reserving the images of products which they added to cart. So that's like a really common tactic, similarly to email, you know, where you get the abandoned cart emails.
Yeah.
It always perform really well. One aspect actually, which isn't often looked at from a remarketing perspective, but you can be a bit more sophisticated where within your product feed, within Facebook or your catalog, you can build out product specific sets. So one issue you might have seen when you're scrolling through Facebook is if you've been on, say, like a big retailer that serves men and female clothes, you might get served 3 images of the shirt you looked at, and then the 4th might be a pair of like female shoes or something completely unrelated. So what you should be doing with your dynamic product ads is building out really specific product sets, so that if someone's looked at, say, for example, your House of Fraser, if someone's looked at a Ralph Lauren jumper, they only get served Ralph Lauren products within your gender set. That's a good way to make sure that your ads are like really tailored rather than otherwise it would kind of just be essentially chosen by Facebook what products are served. So you want to have a bit more control over that. Then it also means you could change the messaging. So if it were to be that example, you could have the message, come back and check out the latest releases from Ralph Lauren. Here's a USP about the brand, come back and buy, something like that. So yeah, DPAs are obviously, like a big part of retail now. And I think, it's definitely interesting. I just think there's more and more you can do to it, which is good.
Yeah, absolutely. And just making it so personalized and targeted is brilliant. Great. So sticking on the topic of retention, our second question for you today is, how would you recommend that e-commerce stores incorporate loyalty tactics into their paid media opportunities?
Yeah, definitely. So loyalty is an interesting one. So it's like probably the best way to improve customer lifetime value and customer retention. And for us in PPC, regardless of what you're selling, you'll probably compete with Amazon. Their impression share across every industry has increased year on year. They're absolutely huge. Obviously, they do a lot in terms of kind of Amazon Prime, pretty low costs and good prices. So we always tell clients that kind of loyalty is one of the best ways to stand out. And especially as well, we work with a lot of wholesale businesses who have begun to look at direct consumer. And again, loyalty is like a great opportunity. So, other than having like really good brand values, really good fulfillment, like good packaging, potentially a gift with purchase, loyalty is typically like one of the best avenues to go down in terms of like driving that retention and everything else. Econsultancy done a good study or an interesting study on loyalty. 80% of customers said they'd rather go to a brand where there was something available from a loyalty perspective. And obviously those numbers are great. And in general, it's pretty good from a marketing perspective to have something like that to promote. And the opportunities, so to be honest, we don't see it used as much as it should be. So from like a marketing perspective, say for example, so I know you guys like integrate with Digital and a few of the other ESPs, but you can use that ESP data within your search activity to dynamically change what ad they see. So for example, if you know that someone's referred 2 friends, you could bucket them into a group and then change the ad copy. And it might be refer more friends and receive this discount, as you know that they're actively a customer who refers people. Or it might be if they've got, say, between 1,000 and 1,500 points, and you know for them to get to 2,000, they get a certain discount. You could also put that in your ad messaging as well. So ad customizers in search are like a good automated way to make sure people are seeing relevant copy based on how they interact with the brand. And then likewise, that works as social as well. So 2 big opportunities for social would be, one would just be, as I mentioned, to bucket people into kind of like different databases. So potentially pushing that through to your ESP, pushing that automatically through into Facebook, and then dynamically changing what copy they see based if they're a customer who have got a few points but haven't been back and purchased, you might give them a reward. So say, come back and buy now and get an extra 100 points or whatever it might be. But I think for social, which we don't really see, which would be quite interesting, would be promoting kind of like refer a friend to current customers. And then the benefit there would be that customers could share the ad format, and then obviously you get kind of like brand awareness for free, where people are kind of like engaging with your content and sharing it to potential new customers. So in general, I'd say loyalty is like a huge thing for retail, really positive in terms of like driving customer lifetime value and driving like retention. And there's a lot of opportunity through media, but it's probably not used as much as it could be.
Yeah, I really agree with that, actually. It's interesting. I was at an event all about Amazon quite recently, and people were saying a lot that product search is where Amazon is really winning. People go on Amazon to search brands, and they go on Google to search, they go on Amazon to search products, and they go on Google to search brands. So actually, if you're a retailer who's really strong on your brand values, you're going to struggle to communicate that as well on a platform like Amazon as you do elsewhere. And I think there's so many ways that you could be using your paid media and your loyalty program together to really communicate those brand values. So it doesn't, as you say, it could be things like referrals, but it also could be, you could use your loyalty program to drive more reviews, and then you could use those reviews in your ads and things like that. And changing up the content as well will just make it a bit more effective, I would think. So yeah.
Reviews are huge as well. So if like Google Shopping and Google Search, like reviews now play an influence in like quality score in terms of if Google see that people are interacting with ads when seller ratings are served, you'll kind of be rewarded. So seller ratings in general are great. You can, I think Trustpilot did a study where your Google Shopping CTR will typically increase by 30% if you have seller ratings.
Wow.
And it's good in general. I don't know what the conversion rates are like on a PDP when kind of reviews are served, but I'm sure it would increase. And obviously loyalty is a good way to kind of push those push those reviews through and just make sure people are leaving like good content on the site.
Yeah, absolutely.
And even
Brilliant.
loyalty is probably like a good option to kind of push that as well.
Yeah, absolutely. Brilliant. Well, our third question for you today: how do you think the e-commerce stores should be measuring the success of their paid media campaigns? And this is a really great question from my perspective, because it's the big question for every marketing channel, isn't it? Great, you're investing in it, but how do you actually report on the success of it?
Definitely. So it's absolutely, I guess it's a very big question, and I'm going to try and talk more around like ways to measure performance rather than kind of like a recommended approach, just where it's still quite subjective. And yeah, there's like obviously different attribution models and a lot of things to consider. So I'll just go through kind of like the theory of like what to consider. I guess the first part would be establishing your KPIs. So if you're looking to drive brand awareness and purely like show new customers about your business and not necessarily focus on sales, you want to be looking at engagement. And the first thing I'd say about engagement is I've worked with like a lot of big retailers in the past with like quite substantial budgets, and they would look at click-through rate as a metric, which I'd typically recommend against. So as soon as you're running, like a display advert on mobile, you'll potentially get a lot of accidental clicks. If you're pushing promotional messages, it will like artificially increase your CTR. But if they're not doing anything on the website, it's not too valuable. So typically, for any brand awareness piece for clients, we would recommend using kind of like GA engagement metrics. So it might be that you create new goals based on the number of pages viewed, have they looked at a PDP page, have they spent more than a minute on the website, what's the bounce rate. So the main thing I'd say on like a brand awareness front would be, don't just look at the engagement metrics from an advert perspective, look at what they're actually doing on the website. And that would kind of be a key consideration there. And then I guess I'll focus more on revenue and ROI, just because we work mostly with retailers. Obviously, a lot of people have that as a core focus, especially for search and social. You're always kind of like measured on a return on investment. And then one thing I'd say what's interesting here is looking more at kind of like profit margin per category. So if you're a reseller, for example, and you sell different brands, you'll obviously have a different profit margin per brand. So you want to make sure that you're taking into account what that is based on your return on investment, and make sure that's something which is considered. And then just talking, like, I guess, a bit more generally about measurement of paid media campaigns, I guess the two big topics to make sure you're aware of would be attribution and incrementality. So they're both obviously big subjects in their own right, but attribution is essentially how you assign value to your marketing channels. And I guess as a really like basic example would be, if we use Google Analytics tracking as an example, if someone on a really easy user journey, so say for example you promote your website on via an Instagram advert, the user clicks the advert, signs up to an email, a week later clicks through on an email, and then later that night clicks on your branded PPC advert and then buys something, which I guess is probably like not an uncommon user journey. And Google Analytics would, in its default model, would assign all of the credit of that sale to the PPC branded click, when obviously it was the social channel which probably had one of the bigger influences in terms of it was the first touch channel, if it was a prospecting campaign served only to new customers, they wouldn't have known what the brand was until they saw that advert. So attribution is essentially how do you manage that journey and how do you assign value differently. So the Google Analytics default model would be that 100% of the credit goes to the PPC branded click, but there's obviously, as a first click attribution model, which would assign it all to social. There's position based, which essentially assigns 40% for first, 40% for the last click, and then 20% to anything in between. And then the biggest change in the industry in the last 2 years is data driven attribution. And that essentially assigns value based on the different touch points as to how much they impacted the conversion. And they do that by analyzing every single user journey and how people convert. So attribution is one thing. If you've not really looked at that or considered it, that would be something to review. So you want to make sure that you're assigning value to your other channels and not just looking at GA, which obviously favors channels which are lower down the funnel. And then the next point was incrementality. So this is quite interesting as well. So incrementality is essentially how likely would a sale have been regardless of your advertising. So a good example here would be retargeting. So if someone's added to cart and then you serve them a Facebook advert and then they go and purchase, incrementality is the study of how likely would they have been to purchase that anyway. And if you're spending a big proportion of your budget on retargeting, that's something to consider. So, obviously I've mentioned at the start that dynamic product ads are, core to retail now. You want to make sure you're retargeting people who have added to cart, but also you want to make sure you're not spending too much of your ad budget on potentially people who would have converted anyway. And then I guess also another thing to consider is, so with search especially, but I guess just marketing in general is there's a big diminishing returns curve. So if we use search as an example, you would start off with your branded keywords. You would focus on then really product specific terms which relate to your products. And then once you've maximized your reach there, you might spend more on broader generic keywords. And then obviously there's a diminishing returns in terms of if you were to double your spend, you would potentially only get, 50% the return back. And then so what you want to look at with diminishing returns is looking at the marginal CPA. So that additional 100% extra spend that you applied into search, see what that actually drove additional in terms of sales. Because it might be that when you start to invest too much in the channel, you might be better off investing it elsewhere. So it could be that might be more efficiently spent on social, for example, if you've not done that before. But yeah, in general, measurement of paid media, it's come a long way. Data-driven attribution is a very good model if you've got the data to use it. But there's no exact science to it. So I've just tried to provide, more of the theory, and then you can apply what's ever most relevant to your business.
Amazing. I think that's a lot of insight. It's fantastic. I know as a marketer myself, attribution is just a permanent headache and has been for the entire decade I've been in marketing, really. So yeah, it's really useful advice. Brilliant. So I've got one last cheeky question for you. We had a few people also wanting to know, what are the worst paid media campaigns that you've seen? Or is there one that particularly stands out in your mind as, oh, that went wrong?
So that's interesting.
Putting you on the spot here.
I've seen a lot of mistakes, which is quite fun. Yeah, I've seen a lot of mistakes, which I won't go into too much detail actually, but from past agency experience. And one thing we do see, quite often is poor translations. So we've seen examples of foreign retailers, or say European retailers trying to sell in the UK, and obviously with translations you need to get it exactly right, otherwise it can just read really poorly. Seen a lot of bad examples there. And then another one I would flag actually, there was a famous example. So with automation in search, as I mentioned, it's grown and grown over the last few years. But there's a feature in AdWords called DSA, dynamic search ads. And what Google essentially do is you would put in your URL of the page that you want to target, and then Google will basically serve you to queries which relate to the content on your website, but it will also dynamically build an advert for you. And there was a famous example where Amazon ran this, and the ad copy basically said, like, buy a baby online. I can't remember the exact example, but it's like huge in the industry. And so that's one thing I'd watch out for with automation. You need to really consider what's being pushed. And if it's anything to do with messaging, even translations, you probably want to have a manual touch and make sure you've always got like a proper review of what's being served. So yeah, it's been a few nightmares in my time.
Yeah, absolutely. There's some pretty good warnings to take on board there, I think.
Definitely.
Yeah, fantastic. Well, that's all we've got time for, really. So thank you so much, Josh. I think there's a lot of people to take away and try implementing themselves there. So thank you so much for your time. Thanks to everybody else for joining as well. And as I said, if you do have any questions you'd like answered either by ourselves or by Josh, then please do tweet us using the hashtag Ecommerce Espresso. Finally, one last big thank you to Josh.
Cool. Thank you very much for having me. Thanks, LoyaltyLion. And thanks for your time.
Great. And we hope to see you all online again soon.